everyone, and a special good morning to my Bethel Early Learning Center friends. Welcome again to my kitchen for Cooking with Miss Ronni. Today we have a guest cameraman. Mr. Liam has to go to the dentist, so Mr. Tim will be filling in, so a big thank you to Mr. Tim. Today we are making a delicious recipe, and it's a little dreary here in South Florida, so it is the perfect day to do some baking. So today we are making brownies. And if you're a fan of cakey, light, fluffy brownies, well, you probably should go do a puzzle right now because this is not the recipe for you. But if you like chocolatey, fudgy, dense, delicious, heavy, yummy brownies, then stay tuned because you definitely want to learn how to make these. They are super easy. It's made all in one bowl, and I would ask anyone that usually makes brownies from a mix to give this a try, and I bet it's even easier. So let's get started. So let's look at our ingredients. We have a half a cup or 1 stick of butter, and that's actually already in this bowl, and I'll talk about that in a minute, along with the 8 ounces of chocolate chunks, and that's in this bowl. Then I have the sugar. We have eggs right here, 4 eggs, one's cracked, 3 are not. We have vanilla, and that's right here. And all of you know I just have to sniff it every time I say it. We have flour, which is right here in our big flour tub. And then of course we have our salt, which is right here. So we know that we have all of our ingredients assembled and we're ready to go. Now, before you guys arrived, I washed my hands. I greased an 8-inch pan, which is this size. You could use glass. I have metal. Metal doesn't break, so I think it's a little bit safer when we're cooking with young children, but glass would work too. So I buttered the pan, and then I have a piece of parchment paper that I sort of smushed into the sides. It's okay if it crinkles a little bit, and then I put some butter on that too. And then I've also preheated our oven to 350 degrees. Now the other thing that I did was I melted our chocolate and our butter together. Now we're going to talk a little bit about melting later, but basically it's super easy to do. Here's my usual bowl that I use to cook with all of you. I set it over a pan of water and just on the stove on low heat until it's all melted. So now I'm going to get rid of this water and we can get started on our cooking. Now once this is melted, you're going to let it cool for a little bit. I wanted you to kind of see what it looked like when it was melted. And then we're going to use our whisk, and everything is going to be made right in this one bowl. So we're just going to give it a stir, and you'll see that very quickly it all combines nicely, and it is already looking chocolatey and absolutely delicious. So there we go. It's a very forgiving batter, so you don't have to worry if you're not perfect. Okay, now the next thing we're gonna add, or the first thing I guess we're gonna add, is our sugar. So we have 1.5 cups of sugar. So I'm gonna use my half-cup measure, and I'm gonna measure out 3 half cups because that will equal 1.5. So here we go, we can count together. 1, 2, 3. Now you might say, Miss Ronni, that's an awful lot of sugar. And I would say to you, well, they're brownies, so they're delicious and they are a treat. So when we bake and we eat baked goods, first of all, we know that they are healthier than the baked goods that we may buy in the store, because we know exactly what's in them because we are making them ourselves. And all of the things we bake, they're meant to be treats. They're not to replace, your healthy food, but it's okay to have a treat every once in a while because that's why they're called treats. So anyway, you can see the sugar mixes in and it'll be pretty thick, okay? Now, we're gonna start adding in our eggs, and we're gonna add our eggs one at a time, and we're gonna mix after each one. So here we go, there's one egg. Okay, and now we'll get our second egg. And remember, we tap, tap, tap nice and lightly. When it has a little crack, we put in our thumbs and in. This is also a good way to make sure, as I've said before, that you don't get shells in your brownies, because I don't think that would be very tasty. And it's also a good way to make sure that your eggs are kosher. So, because if eggs have a little funky blood spot or anything like that in them, they are not kosher. So if you keep kosher, you wouldn't want to eat an egg that has that inside. All right, and here is our last egg. And all of our eggs have been perfect. We're gonna just dump that in. And there we go. Okay. Now after all of our eggs are mixed in, the next thing that we want to mix in is our vanilla. All right, there we go. And we need 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So here's our vanilla. Here's our teaspoon. We know it's a teaspoon because it has that lowercase t. And in goes the vanilla. We'll get that a little mix. Now after the vanilla goes in, the next thing that we're going to add are our dry ingredients. Now you may notice that this recipe is a little bit different than the others that we've made, because we haven't made it where we mix the wet and the dry. We just kind of put it all into one bowl. And you may have also noticed that there's no baking powder or baking soda or yeast, any of the other things that we've used as leaveners. That's because these are a dense brownie, and the eggs are going to give us just a little bit of poof that we need. Because eggs can also be leaveners. You may remember that from the first show that we did where we used egg whites. So anyway, let's go ahead and we'll put in our dry ingredients. We need 3/4 of a cup of flour. So here's our flour. Here's our 3/4 of a cup measure. Let's count together 3. 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to add in our salt. And for our salt, we need 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So that's right here. And in that goes. And now we're going to use our spatula, and we're going to very gently mix the flour and the salt in. And it looks kind of pretty when you do it. Excuse me, but yeah, and you know, and pretty soon it'll be all chocolatey again. Now, believe it or not, that is it. Those are all the ingredients in our brownies. So you see what I meant when I said it's going to be a very, very simple recipe to do all in one bowl. And I would argue again, just as easy as buying from a mix. And because it's done all in one bowl and there's lots of mixing involved, it is the perfect recipe to do with young children. And you'll notice if you have basic baking supplies at home, you can make brownies anytime. So now we're just going to take our brownie mix. We're going to pour it right into our bowl. Excuse me, into our pan. And if you weren't here, I would probably lick the spatula and the bowl. But I think I'll refrain from that since all of you are watching. But there were some arguments in my house when my boys were younger about who was going to get to lick what. So, you know, it's always very popular. And then we're just going to spread it out flat. We're going to make sure that it is in all of the corners. And that's it. Those are our brownies. And now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put it in the oven. Now these are gonna bake for 40 to 45 minutes until when you put a toothpick in, it comes out with just a couple of moist crumbs attached. And you should know when it first comes out, it's gonna be kind of puffy, and then I'll show you one a little bit later. It will deflate a little bit, and that's normal. So let's go ahead and put it in the oven. And we'll put on our timer for 40 minutes, and there we go. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about melting. So let me show you a couple of things to explain a little bit what melting is. So melting is when we turn a solid into a liquid. So the first question is, what is a solid? So a solid is something that you can hold in your hand, for the most part, right? So a rock is a solid. Now a solid doesn't have to be hard. This bath puff is also a solid, but it's soft. But I can hold it in my hand, so it makes it a solid. Now a liquid is something that I can pour, like this water that's here in my measuring cup. I can pour that. Now, how does a solid become a liquid? Well, that's where melting comes in. And in order for something to melt, we need to apply heat. So here in Florida, it's hot outside. We know a lot about heat, right? So when you go outside, it's hot. Or like we did with our chocolate and butter, when you put it on the stove. All solids have a melting point, and that's how hot they need to be when they turn from a solid into a liquid. Now, how do we measure temperature? Measure heat? Well, we measure heat using a tool called a thermometer. And many of you are probably familiar with the thermometer because, well, sometimes when we don't feel well, our body has a temperature, and your mommy and daddy or your trusted adult may use something like this to take your temperature. This is called a thermometer, and a thermometer measures temperature. Now, thermometers can come in all different shapes and sizes. I have one here that you can use for candy. I have one here that Mr. Tim uses when he makes meat. I have one here, this huge giant one that I use for testing chocolate. So there's lots of different ways that we could take temperature. But what's happening inside of the solid when it turns from a solid to a liquid? Well, everything in the whole world is made up of small parts called molecules. Now, molecules are so small that you cannot see them, not with your eyes. You need like a super duper microscope to see molecules, but they're there. And when something is a solid, we're going to pretend that these marbles inside of my container are the molecules. And when something is solid, those molecules, well, they're cold. They're packed in so tightly inside that they can hardly move. But when we add heat to the molecules, they start to get a little hot, and they need space from their friends. So as the molecules spread out and need space, they start to spread out from each other, and they start to be able to move more freely because they're hot. So when they're solid, they're all packed together. But as they become a liquid, they can move more freely. And that's why we can pour a liquid so easily. We can talk more at another time what happens if they get even hotter. But that's basically what we're doing to the chocolate and the butter when we melt it over the stove. We're making it so that the molecules that are all cold and packed together in the solid chocolate and the solid butter start to spread out and melt and become a liquid. Now you can do a cool melting experiment at home to test this theory a little bit more and see what things melt when. How hot does something need to be? So let me show you a little experiment that you can do. You can set it up just like this at your house. If you have an old-fashioned ice cube tray, it's actually perfect. My ice cube trays are at school, unfortunately, so we're making do. But you can see I had put some water, some ice cubes in here. They've already started to melt into water. And here's my ice cream, which is now more looking like ice cream soup. Now you can test anything you want. I have some fish, some gummy candies, some frozen peas, dried apricots, marshmallow, like M&M candies, and some cookies. Now you could take this outside and then watch over time and see what melts when. And then you can even use a thermometer to test how warm something is when it melts. So that's a nice fun activity that you can do, a little comparing and contrasting. And so I hope that you enjoy that at home. So now you're probably saying, okay, Ms. Ronni, where are those delicious brownies? Well, I made some for you ahead of time. Now, when the brownies come out of the oven, you're gonna wanna make sure that you let them cool all the way before you try getting them out of the pan. So if you try getting them out of the pan when they're really hot, well, it may be a little bit of a disaster and it may kind of fall apart on you. So here are my brownies, they're all cool, and you can kind of just peel back the parchment paper and see how delicious those look. So I'm gonna cut one for you. I have a special tip. My Uncle Roger is the one that shared with me that if you have fudgy brownies, the thing to use to cut them is a plastic knife. And at first I thought he was a little crazy, but you know what? It actually works for fudgy brownies. So here we go. I'm just gonna dig right in here. They may crumble a little bit because the top may be a little bit hard, but no problem there. And I'm just gonna cut a little one for myself to taste for all of you. And so you can get a close look in there and see how fudgy delicious these are. Wow. So all I'll say is you have to make these brownies if you are a chocolate fan. And I promise you, everyone will love them. They do freeze very well. If you happen to be someone that enjoys nuts, you can add nuts in them. Another great thing to do with these brownies is, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we made chocolate chip cookies. You can make a layer of chocolate chip cookie dough, put a layer of a sandwich cookie, like an Oreo looking cookie in the middle, and then the brownie batter on top, and bake that for a sinfully delicious brownie that my children happen to really love. So there's lots and lots of possibilities for this basic recipe. So I hope that you've enjoyed this session of cooking. Today is a very special day. After I say goodbye to all of you now, I am going over to school where I haven't been in some time to gather all of our children's belongings. And I look forward to seeing you this afternoon at our cubby pickup. So if you have any questions about that, you can just give me a quick email. And thank you so much again for coming. So have a wonderful day. Bye-bye, everybody.